A few weeks back, I left a community post asking for video suggestions, and I was left this comment suggesting something for Black History Month. For all the years I've been running this channel, I never done that before, and now it's a great time to do it. As a tribute to Black History and Black History Month, this video is going to look at 10 rock icons who paved the way for rock and roll as we know it. To better explain, rock music owes a massive part of its legacy to Black musicians through the years. This video is not a top 10, it's just a list of amazing musicians who contributed to what would become rock and roll and what rock music is in enormous ways. You know how these videos work, let's get to it.
I want to meet all of my brothers.
Starting off with one of the pioneering guitar players in rock music, Sister Rosetta Tharpe transitioned over from gospel music to lay the foundation of rock and roll as a self-taught guitarist. This is a woman who was an inspiration to Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Little Richard, and way more. Tharpe was one of the first guitarists to change her sound with heavy distortion, which led to more influence in rock. One of the best quotes to describe the personality of Sister Rosetta Tharpe was in her response about how she plays music. "Oh, these kids in rock and roll, this is just sped up rhythm and blues. I've been doing that forever." That's the truth. Also, she was rock and roll before that term had any meaning. Tharpe passed away in the 70s and was scheduled to record more studio work the day before she died. Tharpe was still making music and recording through her late 50s after many health issues. She embodied that creative muse and getting lost in playing, which was crucial for rock music to exist. Another name in rock history that truly does not get enough credit goes back to the early 50s with Bo Diddley. His contribution to rock came from the transition from blues to rock, being a direct influence to the Beatles, Rolling Stones, and George Thorogood. Diddley's contributions to many genres is still heard today in music, and his technical ability and creativity with guitar effects elevated that style of rock music. By using tremolo and reverb effects on his signature square guitar, Diddley became a big name in the 50s, and that continued on in the surf rock style in the mid-60s. Some songs like Say Man and Roadrunner sound like listening to a time capsule of music, and you can hear how much personality came out in each performance. Another self-taught musician who said, "Everything I know, I taught myself." Ellis Bates, or Bo Diddley, started playing as a teenager and continued playing into his 70s, also playing with every name you can imagine, including B.B. King, Rolling Stones, The Clash, and New York Dolls, along with many others over generations of music. In the late 1980s, Diddley was hired by Nike to help run with Bo Jackson for the Bo Knows campaign. Bo Diddley knew a lot and had several lifetimes of events to back up everything he was involved with. Switching over from guitars to ivories, Little Richard was an icon on the piano bench and a huge part of what drove the attitude and loud energy of rock, where he would earn the title of architect of rock and roll. It fits as well because Richard laid the foundation for other types of music to bloom out of rock as well, including funk. Little Richard had that flair that rock needs to be successful. And in current day, there are many rock musicians that need to watch and listen to Little Richard's performances to understand there's more to rock than just an instrument or voice. Little Richard was one of the first musicians to have appeal with all races back in the 50s and 60s, which was a big deal as well. Little Richard also had a big comeback in the 80s and 90s, which continued his legacy. I remember watching him as a little kid and seeing him all over sitcoms well after his heyday. Little Richard was an American icon as a wildly creative pianist and over-the-top singer, and rock and roll still benefits from that to this day. Jumping back to guitars with Chuck Berry, the named father of rock and roll, and he is responsible for the idea of having guitar solos and showing off with an axe as a statement in rock music. In the 1950s, Chuck Berry was a huge name that sparked the movement of rhythm and blues to rock and roll, and songs like Johnny B. Good and Roll Over Beethoven have remained cherished tracks in American culture. Every time you hear a guitar solo, you need to think of a song like Johnny B. Good and how in 1958 that was a ludicrous notion. Chuck Berry was a household name for decades because of what he did in music. There is a reason that Berry was one of the first few musicians to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I am dancing around the man's personal life, as it's not a great history. Chuck Berry lived a rock and roll lifestyle in more ways than one, and wow, that's putting it lightly. But it can't be stressed that without Chuck Berry, there would be no rock music, or at least not how we hear it today.
I might be weak, yeah, but I
If you think that Aretha Franklin is not an important part of rock and roll history, then you are out of your mind, because that woman has more ability, skill, and passion for performance than most rock bands in the last 5 years combined. The Queen of Soul gave endless contributions to many genres, including rock, and her dynamic personality and presence fed into what live singing should be as an expression. Aretha Franklin effortlessly demanded attention as a performer, and her voice was malleable to any song type. Her contributions to rock and roll from the 60s into the 70s stood out, and as time went on, Franklin would continue to wow people with her singing, piano playing, and her ability to take other musicians' songs and make them instantly better. She could take the most boring stock song and turn it into gold. Endless collaborations with names like Elton John would become legendary, and as time went on, music fans realized she is as much rock and roll as any other genre. From Chain of Fools to rocking with the Blues Brothers, Aretha did it all. In that same time era came a legendary singer and pianist who helped change how music could be presented. Ray Charles is one of the best musicians ever and had a brilliant mind that understood how music should be felt as a creative process. The business side of rock and roll and how audiences should experience music was improved by Ray Charles. The man is owed greatly for that. Charles went blind as a child and learned how to make other people listen the way he does. When the movie Ray came out, I think it put more focus on the promoter and professional Ray Charles, which helped because he was the whole package at a time where his style of music was reaching everyone. Ray Charles is also a musician that many people do not realize how much he has performed and made famous. People know Hit the Road Jack and Georgia on My Mind, but don't attribute it to Ray Charles. The best praise I remember about him was from Billy Joel saying he thought Ray Charles was more important than Elvis Presley. That's high praise. Jumping to a group of innovators, hardcore punk, in fact punk in general, would not be the same if it were not for Bad Brains. A band that started out as a jazz group that would birth the aggressive, fast sound of punk. Inspired in part by the Ramones, Bad Brains were as in your face as possible and knew it was pushing the right buttons. As their success grew, and the group would inspire many other punk groups. Aggressive, extreme, at times vulgar, and absolutely a movement in the punk scene. Much of that attitude that stemmed from punk music in the 80s can be traced back to what Bad Brains were doing on stage every night. Names like Beastie Boys, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Guns N' Roses all cite Bad Brains as their inspiration. There have been breakups, hiatuses, and changes since 1976, but the core of Bad Brains would always return, and I feel still does not get the respect they deserve. 30 years of albums, endless touring, inspiring massive bands, and doing so with a big middle finger to people who didn't like them. There is passion, there is setting a mood, and there is Prince, who wrote the book on everything involved. Prince and the Revolution was a revolution on bringing in a new attitude and getting a new appeal in rock from a different crowd. His vocal range was as wide as it was impressive, and he succeeded in music, film, and every stage he ever stepped foot on. His music was the 80s for many people. Academy Awards, Grammys, fusing every genre he wanted, Prince's contributions to rock proved it didn't have to be a beer-chugging macho showing, and it evolved how rock could flow in a different direction. His image and style would evolve over time as well, proving he knew how to adapt and make his voice and playing work with any style. Prince's music across the board still has an effect, and with all due respect to the excellent Super Bowl halftime performance in 2022, Prince still had the best. He did all that in pouring rain and still made it the best too. That's impressive. When you talk about famous guitarists, it's important to recognize just how much Slash has stayed a consistent presence since the late 80s. He is responsible for much of the best music from Guns N' Roses, as well as being a permanent fixture in pop culture for his guitar playing and his presence. At a time where wild guitar solos and ballads were all the rage, Slash stood there and blew everyone away. Slash does not get enough credit for many reasons, and one of them is his never chasing trends because he never had to. His ability to play and creativity was always more than enough. Slash also does not get enough credit for being an exceptional songwriter in his own right. When you hear Slash, you think Guns N' Roses, but Slash has been releasing albums with Miles Kennedy and the Conspirators for 10 years now. In the past decade, he has written and performed more of his own studio releases than Guns N' Roses had in the last 30 years. The man with the hat is a musician through and through, and now even in his 50s, he still does not show any signs of slowing down. I'm ending with someone who left us far too soon, and there's no argument, he was one of the most creative and skilled guitarists to ever live. Jimi Hendrix is synonymous with the guitar. That's it. No argument. Seattle's own did not have an extremely long time at the top considering how he was in his 20s when his name spread like wildfire, but after hearing Hendrix play once, it stuck with audiences forever. Jimi Hendrix passed away at 27 and left behind a strong enough legacy to last into present day. When I was 27, I was barely able to get to work on time. Whether it's Electric Ladyland or him shredding the national anthem, Jimi Hendrix had a presence and was a figure for rock music because of how unmatched he was. All Along the Watchtower by Hendrix is one of my favorite cover songs ever, and that's only scratching the surface of what he influenced in the 60s. The biggest tragedy is how much more music we could have gotten if Hendrix wouldn't have passed so young. I remember a quote on a VH1 show many years ago about the best guitarists ever, and when they talked about Jimi, they said, it's not that no one is on Jimi Hendrix's level, it's that no one is even in the same building. I understand that. Hendrix jamming for 15 minutes can go by in the blink of an eye. Jimi Hendrix wasn't just cherished for his ability, but because he was that once-in-a-lifetime musician that greatly contributed to rock music in general. And that was a look at 10 rock icons in Black history. Know of another musician who helps contribute to heavy music? Leave a comment and let everyone know. Big thanks to my patrons and a special thanks to Chris Doman and Dom Noble. You can have a say in upcoming videos, get weekly new music playlists, and see videos early by supporting Rocked on Patreon. Please click the link in the video description for more information. Please subscribe and ring the bell to get notified of upcoming videos, and you can keep up to date with Rocked on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Thanks again for the suggestion on this video. If anyone has other suggestions for future videos, let me know in the comments.